So what is the difference between workplace English and daily English in America?
Let's talk about it. What's up, guys, and welcome back to WaiGuo Friends English. We have done a video recently where we were talking about some phrasal verbs of meetings, and this is really important because, like we said in that video, the words that we use at business are not normal words. We don't always bring up these ideas to our friends when we're just hanging out with each other. That's business. That's business language. A lot of that jargon, a lot of the special vocabulary we leave at work.
So let's say you take the transcripts of two conversations, one among friends that are planning a website together, maybe to start their own business one day or something like this, versus somebody in an established business context, like in a meeting. They're about to build a website for their business. The first thing you're going to notice is a difference in focus and priorities, right? Because a business website, like the whole point of it is to increase conversion rate and ROI. So you're going to be really careful about the way you structure things. There's going to be a lot of focus on how to best make the user experience as easy as possible. Where among friends, they're probably not as concerned about that. Eventually, they probably will be once they start seeing numbers themselves, but they're probably going to focus on like brand colors and content and how helpful it's going to be to the people around them and how much it shows what they do and their mission and their goals. There's going to be a big difference in the content itself.
Beyond that, you're going to see a lot of industry jargon in that business meeting between those two business professionals that are talking about setting up that website. Versus the friends, you're going to see a lot of incomplete sentences, you're going to see slang, you're going to see a lot of incomplete thoughts because they're dreaming, and that's a great place to be. It's actually a really valuable place to be because both of them are trying to get some sort of details, right? Both of them are trying to hammer out something, but they're just kind of in different contexts, and so those contexts determine what vocabulary and how one talks.
Like among friends, it's just like a fun project to do together. But among business professionals, like for a business, there needs to be some real numbers there. So you're doing it for numbers in order to make the rest of the machine work well. So there's a big difference there. And just so you know, small business is somewhere in the middle here. Some small businesses are pretty set on going for numbers and they're really aggressive about that, but others are just like, let's just put it out there, see what happens. There's a huge spectrum here, but we're just going to try to bring out a couple of different situations to kind of show you a little bit of what's different between the two so that as you study English, if you're trying to work in English, you can know what's meant for the workplace and what's meant for friends.
So what are some examples of vocabulary or jargon, specific terms that you're not necessarily going to hear among friends? Like if you're like, hey, let's start a business together. What's something you're not supposed to say?
Probably not ROI, conversion rates, profit margins. There's not going to be a lot of that, I don't think.
You might also hear like them talking about like monopolizing or cornering the market or red tape.
You wouldn't hear friends say that.
No, you wouldn't hear friends say that.
One of the phrasal verbs we had in our last video was key in on. All of those other phrasal verbs you can hear among friends. They're really common in our culture, but key in on is one that I would say I have not heard in terms of informal English. I have heard it in business context, but not in informal English.
Or like bottom line. That's
or the
another
bottom
good
line,
one.
Your friends are not going to be concerned about their bottom line as much. I mean, they might actually be concerned about their bottom line in a way, but they're not going to use bottom line to describe that.
A few others that you might hear in a business context is crunching the numbers, or maybe you say back to square one. Like if you're trying to plan something out and it just can't happen, you'd say, okay, back to square one.
Ballpark number. Give me a ballpark number of what we're looking at here. Like something like that. We're not going to say among friends. Now, friends do use sports jargon and idioms, of course, but these are just a handful of ones off the top of our heads that we would not use in a friend setting. It's just not that common.
Yeah, and the reason why we don't use it is because they're business terms, right? If two friends are starting a business and then one friend suddenly brings up ideas like bottom line, ROI, conversion rate, then what it does is it's telling the other person, oh, we're going business. We're going formal here. When in reality, it could just be like, hey, I just want you to be like kind of like a sounding board. Like, let's bounce off some ideas. Let's do some brainstorming.
Dream out loud.
And that is totally different. Even if you get very specific, when you're really digging into like branding, there's a lot of jargon there. But it's different when you're saying, basically, show me the money. Like, show me where and how we get there by numbers. And it's like, immediately the other friend might feel like, oh, this is not necessarily what I want to have a discussion about. Obviously, the follow-up question is, so what are some terms that you would likely hear among friends then?
You would hear things like, I want to make the colors pop. Again, this is content driven, right? The content is likely to be different, but I want to have something really cool or really awesome, really sleek, catchy. Like, what's my catchphrase? Like, you're going to hear a lot of things to do with the look of the site more than content in terms of like how well it converts. So you're going to hear a lot more of like, I want to just share my ideas on this, or I will do a little bit of this, a little bit of this. It's going to be really mixed up. Things that don't sound like a good strategy, you're probably going to hear, which is fine. Like, it's part of being a fun project, right? If you're not trying to make an income off of it, you're not trying to drive traffic to your business from a website, then have fun with it. And that's what the kind of content you're going to hear. Yeah. You're going to hear a lot more incomplete sentences, like broken sentences, or you're going to hear a lot more slang. It depends again on the generation and the region of the country you're in. All of this varies quite a bit. There are, of course, some up-and-coming like startups that are more edgy and they appeal more to younger generations. Their business meetings are going to sound quite different than somebody whose boss is 60 plus and they're holding more formal meetings. So just be aware that there's a huge difference in generation and lingo for each generation, but also in slang and just how formal or informal the business environment is.
So for example, like a business person might use the term client or niche to talk about their people, but an informal would be like, no, those are my people. Those are my people. My people are the kind of people that do this.
My zone of genius. Like, I want to do something that is just within my own zone of genius. Okay, small businesses will use that. I've heard quite a few say that, but like bigger companies, that's not the language you're going to. So what are some things that we say? Because we're a married couple that does business together. What are some things that we say? Because it kind of mixes the two. What are some things that we say in business context versus dreaming context? I would say we don't say a lot of ROI or conversion rate or anything like that. We can when we're having more structured, okay, we need to focus on this point in our business. This is the weak link. We need to really focus on this. But like, normally, that's not the type of language we're driving to do errands and talking about business. Like, that's not what we're going to say.
Yeah, I think for us, honestly, for a lot of business, it comes down to ideas that you then play out. So it's like when we discuss business, we're talking about ideas, and then those ideas have resulting consequences and jargon and stuff that comes afterwards. But it starts with a very simple idea of like, hey, what if we do this? And then it's like, well, let's talk about it. Let's bring up the numbers. Let's talk how much work it's going to be. Let's talk how much investment it's going to return. There's that ROI again, but we're not going to start there. We're going to get there. We're going to start with the broad idea. We're going to go to the narrow idea to say, is that even possible?
I think something for you guys out there that would be really important to understand is for Josh and I, we're a two-person team. So like, we are our own writers and we're teachers to our students, and we're our own script writers and editors for YouTube, and we are our own marketing and our own email writers. Everything. We do everything. This is something that for us, we can do everything that we do informally and insert these terms when we need to, these more formal terms when we need to. So dreaming to like practical output and actuality is totally owned by us. And so for us, I would say our conversation normally, if we're like more dreaming and stuff, yes, it's informal. If we're talking about like just vision or what we heard from students that would be really cool to do in the business, we do that very informally. But like Josh said, when it comes down to, okay, now we need something actionable, we need to bring the clouds to earth and see what that would practically look like, then our jargon does switch and we start bringing up more of these formal terms because we run the business. So it makes sense that as a small business, literally two people, we are very much have the whole range here. Now, I will say that we spend far less time on the specific business like jargon in terms of ROI and things like that. Maybe it would be smarter if we shifted more to doing that, but we don't run the business as huge where we need standardized terms to understand each other. Because we're married, because we're each other's best friends, we can just drop random things as we're doing normal daily life and understand each other.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the jargon terms that you might hear if you're in business is people that are trying to make details and detailed plans. So if a person doesn't have the need to have a word like return on investment, ROI, then they won't use it. They won't know it. They won't have to have it. But if that is your department, is to figure out, maybe you're in accounting, that's your department, to figure out what's the actual return on investment, then immediately you have to have that term so that you can then use it. And that's a big part of having a big company, is that you actually push a lot of that into other people in other realms so that everybody can communicate. If you actually listen to CEOs and like leaders and like really, really higher ups in businesses, they actually often don't use a lot of these jargon terms, because what they're doing is they're doing the high cloud vision casting kind of thing. And so it's not necessarily about the numbers. They want those people on the earth to bring those numbers up. There's a meeting point where they say, this is the reality and here's the vision. Let's see how well they can mesh.
There's like maybe a person or a team in that middle point to be the communicator piece between like the practical guys on the ground and then the visionary at the top. There's definitely a system there, and it's there for good reason, because if you bring the more visionary person down to where they have to do practical things all the time, they're not going to have a clear head to be creative for the future of the business. So that's why businesses grow, right? We're more efficient when we're in our zone of genius, if you will. So one last question. What do I say that you know like right away that I'm like talking about more practical things versus visionary things?
Whenever there's any sort of like actual numbers, because normally it's after you've crunched some numbers and you said, hey, we have gained or lost 20% or something like that. I'm like, oh, okay, we did some math now and we got to fix it, right? I mean, we can't just like bring up a problem and be like, any sort of numbers or specific figures.
That just kind of tells you, it's like, okay, I'm going to get my tie out.
Let me go grab my business suit and then let's sit down and have a very formal meeting. So mainly those. If you start getting very specific where you give no ambiguity, where it's like, this is exactly what I mean, which is what numbers and figures are about, right? They say, this is exactly where we are. That is when I know, okay, it's time to get down to business.
For you, it's when you say like, let's figure that out. That's how I know, okay, now we're bringing out a calculator, or we're going to like actually look at something more specifically, more mechanically. When Josh does that, it's usually when I'm like, oh, hey, what if we did this? I've heard from a few students this week that this would be awesome, and I really want to help that. I want to be there. And he's like, well, let's figure that out. And I'm like, back to practicality. Let's do this.
A good vision implemented in a real way is a great thing. It's a great part of business where you can actually help people and serve people in a way and say, hey, this is my idea. It's really helpful to my people or to my niche, to my clients. And so let's push it. Let's do it. Let's get it out there.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, I hope this conversation was helpful to you. We had a lot going on in this conversation. So if you were able to follow, well done. That is awesome. If you're really interested in listening to American English conversations at full speed, then refer to this playlist. Here we have a whole collection of these. Almost all of them are tied to phrasal verb videos. So we put the phrasal verbs that we're using that's related to the video that had come prior to it. You'll be able to see us use these phrasal verbs in a natural conversation, and we don't plan these out. We'll put together some questions, but we don't plan our answers. Everything you see is totally spontaneous in these videos. So definitely go check that out if you want more natural listening practice.
And thanks for being here, guys, and we will catch you on the next one.
Bye.